what I'd like you to do, I'll give you an extra 10 seconds each, okay, is if you just kind of state what your field is, because not everybody knows what about it. So I think that'll be helpful. And then after those opening remarks, we'll open up to questions from the audience. So this is a session where you don't just sit here, there, and listen. I'd like you to bring up some of your experiences and pose some questions and dilemmas for the panel, and I'll try to facilitate that. And if not, we'll ask you to leave. That wouldn't be fair, would it? Only those who ask questions can stay. And so hopefully this will work. And in deciding on the most fair order to do this, in order of the presentations, we're going to do order that people are sitting. So first I would like to welcome former past president and esteemed colleague, Barbara Helms.
Thank you, Steve. Originally we thought we had 10 minutes, and then Steve let us know at the beginning that we had 3. So,
it's not fair.
Just Steve. Okay. As someone who's spent the last 3 decades working as an educational researcher and an evaluator, my idea of fairness in methodology, which was my assignment, really has to do with fairness in the projects that we do, fairness in the way we treat the subjects. Now, some of you, 1 or 2, might have been here when I had the honor of being president. And I had to do the one thing presidents always love to do is the presidential address. And mine had to do with something that really related to medicine, which is called first do no harm. And what I talked about was, when was the last time you looked at a child who was struggling with a problem, trying to do a math problem? And it could be a child of any age. Or when's the last time that you tried to help your child with their homework and you were clueless? I heard some snickers, so I think at least 1 or 2 of you have had that experience. And then we go out as researchers, whether it's a graduate student or whether it's a seasoned professional, doing research, conducting an evaluation. And who do we focus on? We focus on students, whether it's through looking at teacher evaluation or looking at students, whether it's high stakes testing or some kind of assessment. And it's always the last person, or really the first person to be impacted, is the child or the student. And when we're putting together our research projects, are we thinking about that person and what is going to be expected of that person? And how are we going to do what it is that we want to do without doing harm to those little people, however little they are? So my idea of fairness in methodology really has to do with looking at that fairness. And one of the things I looked at was the standards for professionals doing an evaluation. And they have a few, they have 30 standards in 7 categories. And one category kind of focuses on that, and it's called propriety. And the attributes have to do with proper, fair, legal, right, acceptable, and just in your evaluation, in your research. Within these ethical rights, responsibilities, and duties, along with the laws and regulations and rules. And I know many of you are thinking on IRB, and you're right. And for those of you who don't know that terminology, it's Internal Review Board and Individual Review Board. And what you're looking at is, what kind of impact are you going to have on the subjects, and getting their permission, or the permission of the guardian, parents, to be able to do this. and making it clear that they have the right to say, no, you can't include my child. So, for me, I think the definition of human rights and respect is evaluations should be designed and conducted to protect human and legal rights and maintain the dignity of the participants and stakeholders. To me, that's where we start with fairness in research and evaluation.
Thank you. What a great opening. Next we have Dr. Kristen Huff.
Well, I couldn't decide if it was good morning or good afternoon, but good afternoon, NERA. It is great to be here once again, and I'm honored that President Darlene Kerner asked me to serve on this guest panel to speak about fairness. My field right now is, I guess the best way to characterize it would be K-12 policy with regard to the use of assessment in K-12 educational policy. My background and training is in measurement, psychometrics, and so I'm only going to use the term diff once, actually one more time. But usually, when people think about fairness and assessment, they think about the methodologies and the analytics we use to ensure bias, typically at the item level, and looking at diff, looking at variables such as race and ethnicity and socioeconomic status. But, I just ask, are these the real variables of interest? And my answer to that is no, these are proxies for opportunity to learn. I mean, that's what poverty means. It means underfunded schools, limited educational choices, and anemic instruction. That's how it shows up in student achievement. So when we think about fairness in K-12 policy, we think about that fairness is achieved through genuine, high-quality educational opportunity for all students. So what does this mean? This means a lot. It means a lot about how we make decisions about school funding, federal policy, state policy. I'm not going to focus on that. I'm going to focus on what it means about the use of assessment. So to achieve genuine high-quality education for all students, it means putting sunlight on the inequities of achievement gaps between students who lack the opportunity to learn, which we know are students in poverty, and we know that poverty is highly correlated with students, with our Black and brown students in our urban areas and with our rural students in other areas. We need to put sunlight, daylight on these inequities and talk about why they exist, the real reasons they exist. It means illuminating those schools and educators who refuse to let socioeconomic status be a student's destiny. There's clear evidence, and it's growing. I encourage you to keep track of this evidence, that proficiency rates and college-going rates do differ among districts that have similarly disadvantaged students. This means something different is happening in those schools. Something different is happening with their instructional choices. It means that these educators do not see a poor, dirty, hungry kid of color who don't speak English so well and make a decision about their academic achievement propensity. It means identifying those teachers who help kids grow their learning, not just teachers who are able to help advanced kids who are advantaged outside of the classroom maintain their advantage. It means highlighting schools and districts who do not offer the rigorous academic instruction to student groups who have not typically done well, kind of perpetuating a self-fulfilling prophecy about these students. And it means speaking the truth, no matter how painful and uncomfortable it is to students and their families, about their readiness. and their level of academic achievement. For all of this, we need really good assessments that are designed to measure deep understanding and advanced high quality standards. We need reliable and valid assessments and that do not have any of the any of the errors of bias. And we need balanced assessment systems. And we need educational researchers and evaluators that adhere to Barbara's standards of fairness as well.
Thank you, Kristen. Next we have David Moss. David?
Morning. Good afternoon. Maybe Kristen's right. David Moss is my name. I'm from the University of Connecticut. I'm a teacher educator. On the faculty, I chose to go with the tie today as opposed to the jacket, as opposed to the jacket and the tie. I hope that's the right call. I guess we'll find out. So this is how I think of fairness. This is a large chocolate chip cookie, if you cannot see this from the bag. And when we break the cookie, right, and we get sort of a small piece and a large piece, if you were to hand this small piece to a 4-year-old, you would get a lecture on fairness. Depending on the time of day, you would get a tantrum based and grounded in the notion of fairness. And you know what I mean? So it made me think about this idea of fairness as something sort of innate, sort of wired into the DNA. Somehow we're sort of driven toward this notion of fairness. And yet at the same time, certainly the notion of fairness is socially constructed. That is, context matters, right? Culture matters as you consider this notion of what is fair and fairness. Now, when I was a kid, my mother had a strategy, and this may resonate with you, right? I had sisters, right? So she'd give one cookie, and her rule was one child broke the cookie, and then the other child got to choose which half. Maybe you were inexperienced with this parenting strategy. And so I think the thought there was, because you didn't get to choose, right, you would try to break it as equally as possible so that, you know, your sibling didn't take this half and leave you only with that half. It was a clever strategy, I thought, but it's different, right? So think about another parent, right, who give that same cookie, right, to a child or sibling, and they didn't use that one child, one breaks strategy. They gave it to a child, maybe big brawny child on one side, and said, you get to break the cookie and then eat as much as you want. And then turned to the sibling, the other side, and said, scrawny little runt of the litter sibling, you get leftovers if there's any. And you would look at that notion and be like, well, wait a minute, that doesn't, right? There's something about that doesn't seem fair. It doesn't seem fair as the one child breaks, the other child chooses strategy, until we think about context, right? And we think about culture. What if we were to learn, for example, that small child had just come from a birthday party and already eaten 12 cookies for the day? Then it might make sense that the other child would get the large part of the cookie, or maybe there's a glucose intolerance or whatever the issue. My point is, the more we learn about the context of the situation, the notion of fairness, it can change a little bit. We can't just think of the construct detached from the environment. So in teacher ed, which is my field, when I think about fairness, just a quick example comes to mind. Student teaching, which is a hallmark of teacher ed, regardless of your program model or design, we send students out to student teach in schools. And these student teachers, they vie for the best placements. But I think, as Barbara brought out, well, what about the pupils in the school? I wonder at points, are we and should we be fair to our teacher ed candidates in sort of affording them placements? Or should we be thinking about those pupils who may now have a novice teacher instead of an experienced mentor teacher in that classroom? And I wonder sort of who are we trying to be fair to as we place students in teacher education. So I don't have answers for you, but I'd like to leave you with a question, and I do hope we'll all get a chance to participate here. And my question is, grounded in the notion of Nell Noddings, and if you don't know Nell Noddings, you need to read her work. She's a mathematician and a philosopher and just fantastic. She frames fairness in teacher ed in terms of winners and losers. Big